All right, so last week we did the first two Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot. I presume we will do more this week. So let's start with with number 3. Okay. Actually, we did 3, so we'll start with number 4. All right, I'm going to read the Hebrew and then we'll look at the English and I'll discuss it. Antigonos ish Socho kibel mishimon hatzadik. So Antigonus, a man of Socho, received the oral tradition from Shimon Hatzadik, Shimon the righteous. Hu haya omer, he used to say, Al tihiyu ha'avadim hamishamshim et harav almanat likabel pras. Do not be like servants who serve their master in order to receive a reward. Ella havu ha'avadim hamishamshim et harav shalo almanat likabel pras. Rather be like servants who serve their master with no expectation, not for the sake of receiving a reward. Vayhi mara shamayim aleichem, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. Okay, so let's go back. Antigonos ish Socho. Antigonus, the man of Socho. You notice anything about that name?
Is that Greek?
It is Greek. It's Greek, right? Like Antigone, right? Well-known character in Greek mythology, right? So here is a Talmudic sage with a Greek name, okay? I mean, you would think, given the tension between the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans and the Hellenistic, I mean, they were occupied by the Roman Empire, right? But it was a Hellenized Roman Empire, right? I mean, Jesus and Pontius Pilate spoke to each other in Greek, not in Latin, presumably. But here is this Talmudic rabbi with a Greek name.
What's the original? What's the premise of this?
And we're gonna come across more sages with Greek names. It makes me feel okay that my name is Charles. I'm not Chaim. All right, so he used to say, don't be like servants who serve their master in order to receive a reward. What does that mean? Don't be like right? That's an analogy, right? Let's make explicit the analogy. What's he saying here? Right? Who's the master? Yeah, Toby.
Who's the master?
Yeah.
I don't know who the master is, but it seems like, I don't know if it's a matter of saying don't expect to be paid for what you're doing, or receive special favors.
Okay. I mean,
but I'm not really.
All right, but I mean,
well, maybe it's a matter of praying to God, and God is the master.
I think so, right? I mean, because it's saying, right, don't be like, right? So if it's, right, if it's like, so it's an analogy, right? And so I think, to me, I think the analogy is the servants are us and the master is God, right? And
Right.
don't serve God in order to receive a reward, right? Either in this life, right? If I do all these mitzvot, I pray regularly and I keep kosher and I observe Shabbos, so I'm going to get a reward in this life, right? I'm going to live a long time or I'm going to be wealthy or whatever. Or maybe it's, a reward after I die, right? I mean, because after all, many historians and sociologists of religion believe that the idea of an afterlife arose from the observed fact that, if you look at the Torah, right, the Torah says, observe the mitzvot and all these good things will happen. Don't always happen that way, right? So, okay, that's true. Doesn't always happen that way, but there'll be pie in the sky when you die, right? You'll get rewarded later on. Alan.
Yeah, the way I read this is you can't do this because you're expecting an immediate gratification, immediate reward, even a reward in heaven. You got to do this because you believe in this. This is something that you find appropriate to do. Let me stop there for a moment because I really have a question about the last part of this paragraph.
All right. And I'll look forward to your question when we get there. But I think you're right, right? I mean, you should not do this because you expect a reward either, temporarily or eternally, right? You should do it because you believe that it's intrinsically the right thing to do. All right. Now the next part, rather be like servants who serve the master without expectation of receiving a reward. And I want to note, I mean, I'm not, there are people who make their living and write PhD theses exploring divergent texts. That's not me, but I do know, by the way, that this text the phrasing of this part is not necessarily correct. Okay, if you look at the Hebrew, I don't know. Can you see my cursor? I don't know what you all can see. Can you see my cursor? Like if I highlight that?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. You
Highlight, yes.
Okay.
All
right. So, oh wow, I don't know what I just did there. All right. Ela havu ha'avadim hamishamshim et harav shelo almanat likabel pras, right? It says, rather be like servants who serve the master without expectation of receiving reward. But there's another version that says, instead of saying shelo almanat lekabel pras, right? You see this? Shelo almanat lekabel pras. It actually says almanat shelo lekabel pras, which means, instead of saying without expectation of reward, it means explicitly with the expectation of not receiving a reward. Right? In other words, instead of being agnostic about whether there's a reward. You explicitly understand that there is no reward, right? But you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. It's intrinsically correct, which I would say is on an even higher level, right? I mean, right? It's like, it's like Pascal's wager, right? You're familiar with Pascal's wager in philosophy, right? He said, I don't know if God exists or not, right? But I'm going to act as if God exists, right? Because if God does exist, then when I die, I'm going to get rewarded. And if God doesn't exist, I'm really no worse off, right? And but this is not Pascal's wager. This is beyond that, right? This is the atheist who observes all the mitzvahs because it's the right thing to do, right? So I just want to raise that. V'havei mora shamayim aleichem. Let the fear, but again, right? Morah, you can't always translate Hebrew into English one-to-one correspondence, right? Because how do you say high holidays in Hebrew? Yamim Noraim, right? It's the same word, right? The root, even though this is a vav, the root is actually a yud. Okay, so the root is yud resh aleph. Okay, and so Yamim Noraim, we normally translate that days of awe, right? So, but you could also translate it as days of fear, or also like awful days, terrible days. But so when we say fear of heaven, right? In Hebrew, it's usually Yirat Shamayim and not Mora Shamayim. There's the same thing. Reverence for God. Okay, and heaven is a euphemism for God. I don't know if I've answered your question, Alan, before you asked it, but
You're getting close. The word fear bothers me. The first part of this is like Emerson's: the reward for a thing well done is having done it.
right.
On steroids. But then let the fear of heaven, if that means your love of God, if that means your love of doing the right thing, and I really wish I could understand what the original, why the context of fear here.
Right. I'm not sure. I am not sure that. Again, I would translate it as awe or reverence.
I can buy that.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's complicated stuff, right? All of this is complicated stuff, which is good from my perspective, right? But right, classically, there are two reasons why people do the mitzvot. Okay, either ahava, love, or yirah, fear. Okay, that I do the mitzvot because I love God so much that I want to make God happy, or I want to, I know what God wants me to do is for my own benefit, whatever. Or, yirah, fear. I do the mitzvot because I'm afraid that if I don't do the mitzvot, I'm going to be zapped, right? And I remember, I don't know where or when or how, but I do remember reading about a guy who was raised Orthodox, and when he was a teenager, he became rebellious, right? So he grew up, in Brooklyn, as all Hasidic stories have it, right? And he went in to a non-kosher deli, an Italian deli, ordered a ham sandwich, sat down at a table, ate the ham sandwich, waited for God to strike him dead, right? When it didn't happen, that was the end of his observance, right? And I have no doubt that his parents probably told him, if you commit an avera, that's what's going to happen to you, right? That's very, very bad. To me, that's bad pedagogy, if nothing else. And stay here for a second. Over the spring, this book came out. I was going to say 600 pages, but it's only about 530 pages. Judaism is About Love by Rabbi Shai Held. I really have to read it. I mean, I really have to read it. It's like probably the most important book about Jewish thought that's come out in a long time. And I actually want to teach about this book, but I suppose that I would probably be more effective at teaching about it if I had read it first. So, God willing, right? But yeah, Alan.
Rabbi, this saying, what he's teaching here, really has a different twist, a very different meaning. If he says, don't serve at somebody you're expecting a reward, be like someone who does this without the expectation of the Lord, and then says, and be in awe of the Almighty, and be in awe of heaven. I like that much better than the fear of heaven.
Right.
And maybe I'm just reading my own thoughts into it, but I don't like the word the fear of heaven, unless they mean an approach to the word awe. But I just think it's weaker. I think it's better. Once you said the awe of heaven, I can buy that. I think that makes sense here.
Yeah, look, I mean, the fact of the matter is, right, and I've said this over and over and over again, not that I expect anybody to do anything about it, right? But, although it would be nice, you cannot really be an educated Jew if you don't know Hebrew, right? Because, like that word yirah, I mean, if you know Hebrew, so it means all those things at the same time, right? But if and that's why, and that's why it also helps to know only like classical Hebrew, but also modern Hebrew, right? Because, like, if somebody who's a Hebrew speaker, right, wanted to say, I'm afraid, right, they would never say, ani yareh. You wouldn't say that. It'd be like walking around speaking, I don't know, Shakespearean English, right? What dost thou want to break thine fast this morning, right? Nobody said, right? You wouldn't say you would say ani mefached, right? And I think that's how you would say, right, I'm afraid in modern Hebrew. And I suspect that the reason for that is that the word yareh doesn't mean fear in that sense of like, I'm afraid. So I think awe or reverence is a better translation into English than fear, right? So, but you could be right. I mean, it could be just our predilection, right? That we, you know, I mean, frankly, right, as Americans, and I really think this is as Americans, right? There's a strong strain of antinomianism in the American soul, right? We don't like to be told what to do, right? And um, so either, I mean, which is one, frankly, I mean, look, I never thought I would get into the sociological analysis of the problems of contemporary religion, right? But what are the religions that are thriving in America right now, right? It is the fundamentalist religions, right? Because they really believe in the fear part,
Mhm.
right? Whereas, look, there is an internal contradiction, right? And I'll share with you something else that I thought it just this morning. All right. There is an internal contradiction because we say that conservative Judaism, we're halachic, right? We're governed by halacha. We're not governed by halacha. We're not, okay? And so here's the thought that I had this morning, okay? Because I get up very early every morning and I go for a walk. And I noticed, particularly on one street on right. So Alan, you live in Montgomery Village too, so you know, right? You're not allowed to park a pickup truck or a commercial vehicle overnight in the village outside, right? If you have a truck, a pickup truck, or a commercial vehicle, you must park it in your garage, right? And if you don't have a garage,
I love
then
it.
park it out on Apple Ridge because that's a county road, right? Well, I mean, I want to tell you the number of vehicles that I walk by at 6 o'clock in the morning that violate that rule is astounding, right? And frankly, I have no problem with that rule, but it does not sort of animate my being either, right? I mean, but if a rule is not enforced, it's not a rule, right? And my concern, frankly, is that when the village allows rules to be violated with impunity, right, then either other rules get violated with impunity and people stop maintaining their houses, right, which does affect me, or else there's a modern Hebrew word, friar, like a sucker, right? You feel like a sucker when you observe the rules when nobody else
Nobody else.
does, right? And so what does this have to do with theology? Right? So Mordechai Kaplan said we should stop talking about halacha as law because law implies that if you violate it, there's a punishment, right? And there is no punishment for violating the laws of, at least of my HOA, Patton Ridge. I mean, I know that you're in a different HOA, right? But Patton Ridge just does not enforce this rule. It just doesn't, right? So therefore, it's not a rule. And the thing that Kaplan said popped into my mind, right? Halakha is not Jewish law because there's no mechanism of enforcement, essentially. is what I'm saying.
Well, I have another question.
Yeah.
When we started, and I found this very helpful last week, you pointed out that the ethics, the things that they were talking about, the direction that was being given in the first couple passages we read, were really to the leadership. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't to be widely disseminated. It was to them so that they could teach this and could understand it to transmit it to other people. Are we still in that area, or who is this being written for?
Well, I mean, to me, this seems like it's more for everybody, right?
Yeah, it
But
does.
yeah, but we're gonna get to stuff that again I think is more specific. I mean, so this is right, this is going down like the chain of tradition, generation by generation, right? So what I should have meant, right? So we have, right? So I'm going to go back quickly to the first mission, right? So Moses received the Torah at Sinai, Moses to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, elders to prophets, prophets to the men of the great assembly. Right now, we're in the next generation, next, let's say stratum after the men of the great assembly, who are known as the zugot, the pairs. Okay, what you're going to see is, right, there's two sages, right? And then after that, you say, so and so and so and so received from them. And then two more sages, right? So there's several generations of zugot, okay? And so the assumption is, right, hu haya omer, he used to say, right, a better translation, maybe less literal, but more accurate in some ways, was this was a favorite saying of his, right? So I think that, I mean, these attributions are probably correct, right? Because it was passed on orally. So Antigonos of Socho, this is what he used to say, right? And so now we'll go on to the next pair, right? You see Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Sreda, Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim. Okay, Yosei, the son of Yoezer from Sreda, Yossi ben Yochanan from Jerusalem, received from them, right? Meaning Shimon HaTzadik and Antigonus. So this is the next pair. Okay. Yossi ben Yoezer is Sreda. Omer Yossi, the son of Yoezer, from Sreda, used to say, Yehi veitcha beit va'ad l'chachamim. Let your house be a house of meeting for the sages. V'havei mitabek ba'afar raglehem, and sit in the very dust of their feet. V'havei shotei b'tzama et divrihem, and drink their words with thirst. Okay, now this I think is once again more geared not to everybody, but to this professional judicial / rabbinic class, right? I mean, I remember, I mean, oral tradition is great, right? I mean, hearing from a rabbi who's older than me, right, who was at JTS in the 60s, I think, right, which was like the 50s and the 60s when you had really like these famous world-class scholars at JTS, right? Because at the time, JTS and HUC both, right? Because there were not Jewish studies departments in universities, right? So if you were a PhD in some field of Judaica, right, you could either like make Aliyah and teach at the Hebrew University, and pretty much it was just the Hebrew University at that time. I don't even think there was a Tel Aviv University, let alone Haifa and Ben Gurion and all these other places, right? So you could teach in Israel, or you could teach at JTS or HUC, right? So you had these really like I mean, if you think of the name, I mean, these are names that you would know, like Mordechai Kaplan, right? And Abraham Joshua Heschel and Saul Lieberman, right? I mean, really like serious world-class scholars. And I mean, I think the story is about Lieberman, and Lieberman, I wouldn't swear, but I think so, and it sounds like him, asked his class one day, why are you at JTS? Right? And they said, well, to study Torah. Wrong. Okay. Well, to learn the skills I need to be a rabbi. Wrong. Whatever. Answer. Wrong. Okay, Professor Lieberman, why are we here at JTS? To be in the presence of great men. To be in the presence of great men, right? And that's what Yossi ben Yoezer might have said, right? And look, and for Lieber, and the more I think about it, the more I'm sure it's Lieberman, because this is precisely the field that Lieberman was an expert in. I mean, he was a great Talmudist. He was a great Talmudist, right? Perhaps the greatest in the world. But his PhD was on Greek in Roman Palestine, right? So if you wanted to look and say, you know, why is this a Greek loanword or whatever, Lieberman was your guy. So this is, you know, he may have lived on the Upper West Side physically, but spiritually, this is where he lived, right? So, yeah, you are here to be in the presence of great men. Okay. I mean, I don't know that that would fly today, but in the 50s and 60s, it still did. Okay. Any questions or comments on this?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Are there different translations and indicate
There are
different
even,
interpretations?
well, all right, you're asking two different things, okay? Yes. I mean, the answer to both is yes, okay? If you create your own account on Sefaria, you can check when you're looking at this by yourself, which you should be. I mean, you can pick a different translation. I mean, Sefaria has, I don't know, a number of different translations for each text. You can pick a different translation. And I think one of the translations actually includes a commentary with it. Okay, the classic commentaries of the Mishnah are Sforno and Bartanura. Okay, which, you know, like just as we were pointing out, like Greek names. So Sforno and Bartanura are also not Hebrew names, right? Sforno is a Spanish name, and Bartanura is an Italian name. Okay, I'm not sure where Sforno lived. I should know, but I don't. But Bartanura lived in Italy. Okay, so the two sort of like main commentaries that you would study starting in like third grade if you went to a day school would be Sforno and Bartanura. There's also more modern commentaries as well. And much of this can be found on Sfaria. I mean, I'm getting bogged down enough as just because that's me, right? But if I were to start to bring, you know, have us be simultaneously looking at commentaries, we would do half a Mishnah a week.
Right.
Right. But yes, there are classical and modern commentaries, and much of it is available on Sefaria.
What much of it is available where?
On Sefaria, on this website.
Oh, okay. And that's accessible. Anybody can access that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's free. Sefaria.org. SEFARIA.org. Yes, Sue.
Is this entire commentary written in Hebrew?
Well, all right. So Sforno and Bartenura wrote in Hebrew, but there are definitely English translations of their commentaries.
Mhm.
Right. I
Okay.
just wondered because aren't there certain parts of ancient writings that were either in Aramaic or other, the originals?
Yes, but all right. I mean, we may even get there to 99.99% of the Mishnah is in Hebrew. Okay, when we get to the Talmud, and this is a little confusing, okay, because the Talmud, of which there are two, but when we say the Talmud, we mean the Babylonian Talmud, which consists of the Mishnah, which is this, and the Gemara, which is called a comment. I mean, people say it's a commentary on the Mishnah. It's not. What it is essentially is like if we were to take the transcript of tonight's class and bind it together in a book, right, and then take similar transcripts from other rabbis all over the country, right, over a few hundred years, that's the Gemara. Okay, and the Gemara is mostly in Aramaic. Okay, but the Mishnah itself, right? And so you can get a Mishnah that's just the Mishnah, or you can get a Talmud, which would be the Mishnah and the Gemara. Okay, there's no such thing as a Gemara just by itself, right? Because that wouldn't make any sense. So the Gemara is mostly in Aramaic, but the Mishnah is almost entirely in Hebrew. Okay, to the point that when I say classical Hebrew, I mean the other term for it is Mishnaic Hebrew. Okay, Mishnah, which is considered like the best and most beautiful and purest Hebrew, even better than biblical Hebrew. Okay, but if we get far enough tonight, which we might, there's some Hebrew in this first chapter. I mean, some Hebrew, some Aramaic, okay, but not a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, now, okay, content warning, okay? This next Mishnah is extremely misogynistic, okay? If this is going to upset you, get up and leave, right? Do not attribute to me the opinions contained in this Mishnah. I do not share them, okay? And just because I am teaching this Mishnah does not mean I share these opinions. Do not report me to the provost, or whatever, okay? And you know what? Looking at the Hebrew takes too much time. I want to move along. So Yossi ben Yochanan of Jerusalem used to say, "Let thy house be wide open, and let the poor be members of thy household." Okay, so far unobjectionable unless, I don't know, unless you're a MAGA, right? Now, engage not in too much conversation with women, all right? All tarbe sichat im ha'isha. That's actually a bad translation, right? Do not speak too much im ha'isha with your wife, I think, right? Well, it says with your wife, and then there's the next part. Actually, I have to do the Hebrew, I'm sorry, because most scholars believe that the next part is a later gloss added later. Okay, but ishto amru kal v'chomer be'eshet havero. All right, they said this with regard to one's own wife. Kal v'chomer, how much more? Right? It's like an argument from a minor premise to a major premise is a kal v'chomer. How much more with regard to another man's wife, right? In other words, don't spend too much time talking to your own wife. And if you're not supposed to spend too much time talking to your own wife,
Even
right,
less.
all the more so with somebody else's wife, right? And from here, the sages said, right, which is why it's a gloss, because it's not even now a statement, right? As long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself, right? Gorem ra la'atzmo, he causes bad things to himself. Ubotel midivrei Torah, he neglects the study of Torah. All right, so this phrase, right, botel midivrei Torah, there's a phrase bitul Torah. Okay, bitul Torah means essentially it's like spending time with frivolity. Okay, in other words, ask some Orthodox rabbis, right? Is it okay to watch this program? Whatever it is. And the rabbi might say, why do you assume it's okay to watch any program, right? Right? You're not allowed to watch TV, all the more so not this bad program, okay? Why can't I watch TV? Bitul Torah, right? It's wasting time on frivolity, right? In other words, let's say you're watching, something that is like unquestionably has high value, right? Watching masterpiece theater. Okay, is there anything wrong with watching masterpiece theater? Not per se. But why are you spending time watching masterpiece theater when you could be using that time to study Torah, right? There's only 24 hours in the day, right? So that's bitul Torah, right? So at a minimum, you're talking to your wife or to some other woman, you're not studying Torah, right? Because, like, obviously women are not Torah scholars, right? Because they don't have the intellectual capacity to be Torah scholars, right? So if you spend too much time talking with women, you cause harm to yourself, you neglect the study of Torah, v'sofo yoresh gehinom, and in the end, you will inherit Gehenna, right? Which is hell, okay? So, I'm not sure if I even want to ask for comments or questions on this, but yes, Marilyn.
Okay, is this the passage that ultimately led to women being separated in the Orthodox congregations?
No. I
No.
mean, no, not really. I mean, look, I mean, that's actually a really good question. There are like a number of things going on simultaneously. Okay. One is, yeah, to some extent, yes, this, okay, because the idea, all right, and again, right, I'm just explaining, I'm not advocating, right?
We won't blame you.
Right. Men are obligated to daven 3 times a day. Women are not. Okay. For whatever reason, they're not. That's the first thing. Okay. Women are inherently seductive. Okay. Nothing you can do about it. It's not your fault, but you just are. Okay. So if I can see a woman when I'm davening or when I'm supposed to be davening, right? That's distracting because I'm looking at women instead of focusing on my davening. Okay. On top of that, kol isha be'erva, a woman's voice is seductive, right? So between like seeing women and hearing women, I'm thinking all kinds of improper thoughts. And therefore, like, not only am I distracted, but like I'm thinking improper thoughts when I should be davening. It basically nullifies my davening, right? So that's why it is necessary for women to be where the men who have to daven and men, of course, we can't help ourselves, right? We can't help ourselves. It's like, if women are around, we're gonna look at them and we're gonna hear them and we're gonna have bad thoughts, right? There's nothing that we can do about that. Okay. So we need to be protected from your seductiveness by putting you where we can't see you or hear you. Okay, because I see, Alan, I'll get there. Because you're not obligated to daven, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is, as I said, women aren't obligated to daven. But then on top of that, there is, yes, this misogynistic attitude that women don't have the intellect, right? In other words, I mean, when Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik had co-ed Talmud classes in his school, right? That was revolutionary. Okay. And it's very, very rare in the Orthodox world, right? You have basically sort of 3 levels. You have a handful of modern Orthodox schools where men and women study top, men and women, boys and girls, really, because we're talking about high schools, right? Where boys and girls study Talmud together. Okay, then you have more common modern Orthodox schools where boys and girls both learn Talmud, but in separate classes. And then you have the ultra-Orthodox world where girls do not learn Talmud at all, okay, for all kinds of reasons. Alan.
First off, give us a historical perspective on this. What is the time frame that Yosef ben Yakinin and the other, well, Joseph ben Yakinin lived? Where are we right here?
I don't know precisely, actually. I mean, actually, give me a minute and I'll see if I can find it quickly. Okay.
Well, my other question, my other part of that is he just reciting
If I can't find it
what was
quickly,
common knowledge,
then
what was the not common knowledge, but the conventional wisdom going back
all right.
a long
So
time?
yeah, all right. So Yossi ben Yochanan is 2nd century BCE. Okay, I mean
That's what he said last.
2nd century BCE. So so 200, right? 200 BC, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, I didn't know exactly. I mean, like obvious. I mean, the latest date would be 200 of the Common Era because that's when this text was codified, right? But it's we're still in the pairs. So, but I didn't know exactly. So yeah, I mean, this is not obviously this is not unique to Yosef ben Yochanan, right? I mean, it's not like he's a dat yachid. It's not like it's only him, right? It's it's the common perception at the time for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Sue.
Well, so this was during the time of the temple. Didn't they have a women's section in the temple?
They did have a women's section, but it was not together with the men's section.
Right, but in other words, they were separated even at that time.
Absolutely.
Do you
Yeah.
know whether women were separate in the synagogues at that time?
I would assume that they were. Right. I mean, because I mean, they were, right. The two institutions existed simultaneously, and I would assume that they would be. Yeah. Okay. So Yehoshua ben Parachia and Nitai the Arbalite, they received the oral tradition from them, Yossi ben Yochanan and Yossi ben Yoazer. Yossi ben Parachia used to say, and this is important. Like this is like some of these things are like some of these phrases are like every rabbi knows them like off the top of his head, and others like not so common, right? But this is a Aseh Rav, K'nei lecha chaver. Appoint for yourself a teacher, right? Everybody needs a teacher. I mean, the word here is Rav, right? Everybody needs a Rav, a rabbi. Uknei lecha chaver, and you need also a chaver, which doesn't merely mean friend. Okay, a chaver is like a study companion. Okay, like if you know the term chavruta, right? That's, I mean, in yeshiva, like nobody sits and studies by themselves, right? You have a chavruta, you have a study partner. And I mentioned last week, the RA set up this chavruta program to bring two rabbis from different parts of the world together to study during this month of Cheshvan. Why Cheshvan? Because there's no holidays, there's a little less pressure on us, okay? So my chavruta is an Israeli woman rabbi who made Aliyah from Russia when she was in her teens. And she goes to Ukraine once a month or so to work. I mean, stories she was telling me yesterday, like I literally burst out crying. But that's a different matter. Okay, but so you don't study by yourself, you have a study partner. V'havei dan et kol hadam l'chaf. Judge all men, and here kol hadam doesn't have to mean man. It really doesn't. Judge everybody with the scale weighted in his favor, meaning give them the benefit of the doubt. That's what it really means, right? If you say dan, Dan l'chafzechut, right? That's a characteristic you should have. You should give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Okay. Let's go on. I definitely want to get to this one because it's one of my. It has newly become once again one of my favorite sayings. All right, Nitai ha'arbeli, Nitai the Arbelite, meaning Nitai from a place called Arbel. Omer used to say, Harchek mishachen ra, right? Stay away from an evil neighbor. Va'al tidchaber la rasha, do not become attached to a wicked person, right? Do not be a fan of a wicked person. Don't do it. Bad thing to do. Va'al tityaesh min hapuranu. Do not despair of divine retribution. I'm not sure why suddenly it's become a favorite saying of mine once again. Since we don't talk about politics, so I don't know exactly, but, it's a bad idea to become attached to a wicked person. And for the next 4 years, we should never despair of divine retribution, right? Halavai. I wish. I mean, I hope this is so. Joe is not here. Joe likes to end precisely at 9. I'm willing to go on a little bit longer if everybody wants to. I don't want to keep people if they, I mean, I actually this is already past my bedtime, but I gain energy from this, so it's okay. So shall we go on a bit?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, Alan.
This next portion talks about receiving the oral tradition.
Right.
How did they? I understand that people told it, but then if you're giving the oral, passing on the oral tradition to me, do you test me somehow? Is there a formula that you have to recite almost like a play? And you would check the words. No, that's not an and. That's a the at that point until I do it over and over until I can repeat it verbatim to your satisfaction.
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, all right, so there is an open question. Apparently, I just raised my hand.
Yes.
Right? It picks up on that. So I had a friend almost 30 years ago, right, who was like a newly minted PhD teaching at the University of Maryland. And his PhD dissertation dealt with the question of how accurately the Gemara really depicts what happened at the time of the Mishnah. All right, because what you find, and if I don't know if any of you, a few years ago, I was teaching Talmud, I was teaching the Tractate of Psachim, and occasionally, there's a quote from the Mishnah, and then, pages and pages and pages and pages of discussion about it. And sometimes in the Gemara, they would say, you know what? Maybe the Mishnah's wrong, right? Not wrong like it's wrong, it's a wrong ruling, but the text itself is wrong, right? The text as it was handed on got screwed up in transmission somehow, okay? And there was, in the time of the Gemara, there was a job, an office called Tana, whose job it was to remember the Mishnah, right? That was their job, okay? To remember the Mishnah. You didn't have to understand it, whatever, you just had to remember it, right? So there is definitely some stuff about making sure it's remembered accurately, right? And making sure, and you see this in the Gemara, like not only, well, maybe the text isn't accurate, but maybe the attribution isn't accurate, right? Because you have two seemingly opposite opinions attributed to the same sage, right? So if you have that, how do you resolve it? Well, there's three possibilities, right? They're not really opposite because they're talking about two different circumstances, right? Or they're not really opposite because one was when he was 20 years old and one was when he was 60 years old and he changed his mind, right? Or the third possibility is one of them is a misattribution, right? It wasn't Rehnquist who said it, it was really Scalia, right? So yeah, so there definitely has to be like a process to make sure that I mean, and actually we'll see this even in this chapter, okay? We won't get there tonight, but we will get there. Okay, so right, so Yehuda ben Tobai and Shimon ben Shetach received the oral tradition from them, the then being Yehoshua ben Parachi and Nitai Ha'arbeli. And it's also interesting, I mean, how to, like, anyone in Jerusalem has heard of Shimon ben Shetach because there's a Shimon ben Shetach street downtown that's pretty, like, prominent. You can't live in Jerusalem and not have heard of Shimon ben Shetach. I don't believe there's a Yehuda ben Tobai street. I mean, I'm not sure how come there's a Shimon ben Shetach street, not a Yehuda ben Tobai street, but sometimes, you know, life isn't fair. Okay. So Yehuda ben Tobai said, do not, as a judge, play the part of an advocate, right? If you're a judge, be a judge, right? If you're an advocate, right? And the phrase that he translates as advocate is indeed orchei hadayanin. Modern Hebrew for a lawyer is orech din. Okay, so it could be like, don't be like the lawyers, right? But which is always good advice. But here, I mean, it really does, right? If you're a judge, be a judge, not an advocate, right? When the litigants are standing by before you, look upon them as if they were both guilty. Right now, I'm not sure why they should but the point is, I mean, I think what is true is don't give one the benefit of the doubt and not the other, right? I mean, treat both litigants the same. Yeah, Alan.
I love this paragraph, to be honest, because it is, in my opinion, the basis of our jurisprudence today that we use here in the United States and that we got from England. And I think what they're trying to say is, look upon them both as they were guilty. You don't just accept what they say. You have to be skeptical. You have to cross-examine. That's why we have cross-examination. You have to question. You have to determine for yourself what's reasonable and what squares with your experience. And then what I really like, and I know you haven't gotten there yet, when they leave you and they accept your judgment, forget it. Forget this whole thing. Let's go to the next. Don't hold this against anybody one way or another. This is really, to me, a very interesting historical paragraph.
Yeah, I think, I mean, right, when, in other words, like, look upon them as if they were innocent, right? Is that we believe in rehabilitation, right? We believe in rehabilitation, right? And, and look, I mean, Alan, you were president of the shul when I first came to the attention of the RA's ethics committee, right? And, everybody knows it, but the point is, because I had an occasion to speak with Rabbi Pressman, who's the head of the ethics committee, about an ethics case involving a different rabbi. Okay. And what he said to me is, look, if we had a poster child for a rabbi who had really been rehabilitated, it would be you. Right? And if we had a poster child for somebody who had not been rehabilitated, because this was somebody who simply refused to cooperate with the ethics committee and as a result was expelled from the RA. Right? And, I mean, I don't know if Rabbi Pressman had this mission in mind, but he could have, right? Because innocent when they have accepted the judgment, right? I mean, I'm not proud of what I did back then. I'm not proud of having committed an ethical violation, but I accepted the judgment. I cooperated with the process, and I did what I needed to do to make sure it won't happen again. Right. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, I think this is really important. And I mean, and that's why we have like ban the box laws and so on. Right. That once somebody has paid their debt to society, they get a reset. I'm not sure how many resets you should get, but everybody should get at least one. Yeah. All right. Good night. We will not meet a week from tonight for obvious reasons. But thank you very much for learning with me tonight, and have a great Thanksgiving. And if you're, if you're traveling, travel safely. If people are coming to you, may they travel safely. May you all be on the same side of whatever arguments come up at the dinner table. Or if not, I don't know, at least, be able to treat each other with respect. And that's it. Okay. Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.